They found the entrance by accident, a contractor, a routine job, a patch of ground near the outer edge of the property that sounded wrong when he knocked on it. Not solid, not earth, something hollow underneath. He stopped working. He knocked again. That same low echo came back, and right there, in the middle of a quiet desert morning in Santa Fe, everything about this property stopped being ordinary. He had not been looking for anything. Nobody had sent him there to investigate. He was there to fix something, and instead he found something that nobody had reported, nobody had permitted, nobody had even mentioned. A tunnel. Beneath the ground, on the private estate of one of the most famous actors who ever lived. Santa Fe County officials arrived at the Gene Hackman property in late February of 2025 under circumstances that were already deeply unusual. This was not a wellness check that anyone expected to turn complicated. 2 vehicles, no sirens, a quiet approach through open desert land toward a gated compound that sat far back from any public road. What they found when they got inside stopped them. No signs of activity, no movement anywhere on the property. A security gate that had gone unmonitored, mail sitting uncollected, and a silence over the entire compound that felt less like emptiness and more like something had simply come to a stop. The kind of silence you do not hear in an empty house, the kind you hear in a house where something has already happened. Inside the main residence, investigators found Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa. Both were dead. The exact circumstances were not immediately clear, and officials moved carefully, reconstructing a timeline that nobody outside these walls had any knowledge of. The world had not known Hackman was even unwell. The world had not known much of anything about him for a very long time, and now, on top of the tragedy of 2 deaths, there was something else underneath this. Property that nobody had been prepared for. The tunnel came to light during the property assessment that followed. County personnel and investigators conducting a full sweep of the compound moved through the main residence, through the secondary outbuildings, through covered storage areas at the far edge of the grounds. And that is where the contractor's original discovery was confirmed. Beneath a section of land well away from the main house, there was a subterranean passage, reinforced, structured, intentional, extending far enough underground that a flashlight was needed to see where it ended. This was not a drainage ditch. This was not a collapsed utility line. This was a constructed, deliberate underground passage that someone had built, financed, and kept completely off the record. It appeared in no public property documents. It was not on any county filing. It had never come up in any conversation that officials could trace. It had simply been there, beneath the surface, undetected for years. The moment that registered, the questions started forming fast. Why was it built? How long had it been there? And what exactly had it been used for? To understand why those questions hit so hard, you have to understand who Gene Hackman was and what his disappearance from public life actually looked like. This was not a minor celebrity who faded quietly. Gene Hackman was, for several decades, one of the most powerful and respected actors working in Hollywood. His performance in The French Connection in 1971 won him the Academy Award for Best Actor. Popeye Doyle became one of the defining characters of that entire era of American cinema. Raw, aggressive, morally complicated, impossible to look away from. What followed was a filmography that spanned more than 30 years. The Conversation, Superman, Mississippi Burning, Unforgiven, The Royal Tenenbaums, film after film after film, each one landing with the kind of weight that only comes from an actor who genuinely understands people. He did not just play characters, he inhabited them. He understood what made them real. And then, in 2004, he stopped. No press release, no farewell interview, no final public appearance to mark the transition. He made his last film, and then he walked away from all of it. He moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, bought land, and in every practical sense that the public could observe, ceased to exist. No red carpets, no award show appearances, no profiles in major publications. For roughly 20 years, Gene Hackman was simply gone. Most people assumed he was living quietly, comfortably, a retired man enjoying the Southwest. What they did not know was how deliberately, how architecturally, that quiet had been constructed. The Hackman estate communicated something the moment you saw it from the outside. The property sat on open desert land north of Santa Fe, positioned in a way that made approach visible from a long distance in every direction. No neighboring structures close by, no casual foot traffic on any adjacent road. The kind of terrain that does not give easy access to anyone who has not been invited. The Southwest desert does that naturally, but the placement of this particular compound made clear that natural isolation was not considered sufficient on its own. The compound itself included a substantial main residence, secondary buildings, dedicated storage, and workshop spaces. The infrastructure went well beyond what a typical retirement home requires. There were systems in place for water storage, backup power, operational capacity that suggested whoever designed this was not thinking about weekend visits. They were thinking about permanent, self-sufficient, long-term occupation. A world inside a world. Security on the property was not dramatic. There were no armed guards visible at the entrance. No aggressive fencing with warning signs posted every few meters. It was subtler than that. Cameras, positioned to provide full observation without advertising themselves. A gate system that functioned quietly. A perimeter defined more by distance and terrain than by physical barrier. Everything about the setup said the same thing. Whatever happens inside here, stays inside here. Which is what made the tunnel so significant, because a man who had already built this level of separation from the outside world had still felt the need to build something more. What made the tunnel genuinely unusual was not just its existence, it was its construction. This was not a rough passage dug quickly or cheaply. The reinforcement at certain structural points indicated that someone had thought carefully about longevity. Concrete framing in key sections. Consideration given to ventilation. The kind of build quality that does not happen unless someone planned it in advance and paid for it properly. This was not improvised. This was engineered. According to sources familiar with the property layout, the tunnel ran from a structure near the interior of the compound outward in the direction of the perimeter. Where exactly it terminated was not immediately clear to those first examining it. It extended beyond the visible range from the entrance point, which meant that for a period of time, nobody standing at the opening actually knew where the other end came out, and the tunnel showed evidence of use. Not recent use necessarily, but use over time. Patterns of wear consistent with regular movement through the passage. Not a structure that had been built and then abandoned. A structure that had served a function repeatedly for someone. That detail was the one that stayed with every person who examined it. The tunnel had been walked. Once word of the tunnel began circulating outside official channels, the interpretations came quickly and they came wild. Online speculation landed in predictable places. Some claimed the tunnel was connected to a survivalist bunker network beneath the property. Others suggested it linked to neighboring properties through some kind of organized underground infrastructure. There were theories about hidden materials, about stockpiles, about the tunnel being evidence of something far more elaborate than a single private passage. Some commentary pulled Hackman into broader conspiratorial frameworks that had nothing to do with him as a person, and everything to do with the public appetite for stories about famous people living secret lives beneath the surface. These theories moved fast because the basic facts were genuinely striking. A reclusive legend, a fortified desert compound, a hidden underground passage discovered only after his death. That combination is going to generate speculation. That is simply how people respond to mystery. But speculation is not documentation. And once investigators completed their assessment and the actual facts of the tunnel's construction and purpose became clearer, the picture that emerged was considerably more grounded than anything the online theories had produced. There was no bunker network. There were no hidden stockpiles. There was no connection to anyone else's property. What there was something more personal, something that made complete sense once you understood the specific pressures that had shaped Gene Hackman's life for more than half a century. The tunnel, based on what investigators documented, functioned as a covered passage between structures within the compound, a means of moving from one part of the property to another without exposure to open air or open sight lines. In a desert climate where summer temperatures in Santa Fe can reach extreme levels, some form of covered passage between buildings is not without practical logic. These exist in various forms on high-end rural properties throughout the Southwest. That part is not extraordinary. What was extraordinary was the degree to which this particular passage had been integrated into the property and kept entirely invisible to the outside world. The specificity of its construction, the fact that it appeared in no records, the fact that Hackman had apparently never mentioned it to anyone who later came forward. In a compound already designed to minimize external visibility, the tunnel represented the most concentrated expression of that same philosophy, taken underground. This was not built for comfort. It was built for complete, unobserved movement, a private route through a private world known to no one outside it. Gene Hackman spent the last 20 years of his life constructing something that his entire career had made nearly impossible. Not wealth. He had that. Not recognition. He had more of that than most people see in multiple lifetimes. What he had almost never had, from the moment the French Connection made him a household name in 1971, was the simple ability to move through a space without being observed. Fame at that level does not stay outside. When you close the door, it follows you in. It changes how you occupy a room, how you walk down a street, how you make decisions about where to go and when and by which route. Even when the cameras are not present, the awareness that they could be present rewires behavior. And for someone who had lived under that condition for 30 years before finally stepping away, the instinct to build privacy into every available surface does not simply disappear when you buy land in the desert. The compound was the large-scale answer to that instinct. The tunnel was the most literal answer, a physical corridor that allowed Hackman to move between buildings on his own property without any possibility of being seen from outside. In a place already shielded by distance and terrain and understated security, he had still found it necessary to take his movement underground. That tells you something real about what those 20 years of public life had cost him, and what he needed the final chapter of his life to look and feel like. When investigators completed their full assessment of the property, the cause of death was formally established. Gene Hackman died of cardiac failure. His wife, Betsy Arakawa, died from carbon monoxide poisoning traced to a malfunctioning fireplace. Based on the timeline investigators reconstructed, Betsy died first. Gene, already in serious physical decline, died within days. Neither death was the result of any criminal act. There was no outside involvement. There was no crime scene in any conventional sense. There was just a compound that had gone silent, a gate that had gone unmonitored, mail that had piled up, and two people who had chosen to live very far from the world and had in the end left it the same way. Quietly, without announcement, without anyone outside knowing for some time that it had happened at all. The tunnel was not connected to either death. It was simply there, as it had always been, discovered now only because the property was being examined for the first time by people who had not built it. What the tunnel leaves behind is not a scandal. It is not evidence of anything sinister. What it leaves behind is a very clear, very physical statement about the kind of life Gene Hackman had decided he needed to live, and how seriously he had taken the construction of that life. Every element of the compound told the same story, but the tunnel told it most directly. Here was a man who had been one of the most watched human beings in America for 30 years, who had stood in front of cameras and crowds and journalists and industry events for decade after decade, who had given everything that Hollywood asked of its most successful people. And then he had come to a piece of desert land in New Mexico and built, piece by piece, a world in which he could not be seen. Not just from the public, from everyone. A gate that kept people out. Cameras that watched the perimeter without announcing themselves. Structures spread across land that itself served as a buffer, and beneath it all a tunnel so that even within the boundaries of his own compound, his movement remained invisible. He did not want to be watched anymore. Not from a distance, not up close, not at all, and for 20 years, remarkably, he achieved exactly that. The desert outside Santa Fe does not give up what it holds easily. Officials documented the tunnel, assessed it, and moved on to the other work that follows a death of this kind. The property record now reflects what was found. The passage is part of the official account of what existed on this land. But the exact reasoning behind every decision Hackman made, the full story of what those 20 years looked and felt like from inside those walls, none of that is in any record. The man who could have explained it was gone before anyone knew to ask. Somewhere beneath the Santa Fe desert, that passage still runs from one end to the other. Built carefully, used quietly, kept secret for years. Discovered only when the person who built it was no longer there to keep it hidden. That was exactly how Gene Hackman wanted it. And for longer than anyone realized, that was exactly how it was.